Hey everybody, before we get going, just a word from today's sponsor, Danelec. Voyage optimization has been a buzzword in maritime for years. So why are most operators still managing routing, speed, fuel, and emission exposure as if they were separate problems? The Great Integration, a new report from Danelec and Thaddeus, argues that the next step in voyage performance won't come from another piece of software. It comes from how existing systems are connected, governed, and used, especially useful if you're running a mixed fleet under tightening regulations. Download your copy today at danelec.com. And if you want to sponsor the podcast, reach out to our friends at Digital Ship. Don't forget, everybody, the only way this podcast grows is with your help. So please punch that like button and leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to. And now, on to the podcast. Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading that charge. In this episode, we sit down with Amy Buhl, Service Operations Leader at Weathernews. Amy brings operational depth and practical insight to the day-to-day maritime and technical realities facing shipping companies today within the maritime weather routing space. This conversation explores the intersection of weather intelligence, vessel operations, crew communications, and the growing expectations placed on maritime teams navigating efficiency, safety, compliance, and operational decision-making all in real time. Amy, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm excited to have you. We'll get into it in a minute. I love weather. I think it's fantastic, but nobody wants to hear it from me. Amy, tell me about your background, a little bit of what you're doing at Weathernews, a little bit maybe about Weathernews, and kind of how you got onto the maritime side, because when people think weather, meteorology, they think the news on TV or other applications. But weather and maritime, and certainly from Weathernews' point of view, it's a big part of what you do.
It's true. Yeah. So my background is I'm a meteorologist. So my experience with Weathernews, or the reason I became engaged with Weathernews, was I got my master's degree at the University of Oklahoma. And right at the time I was finishing up my master's degree, Weathernews was moving their U.S. operations to Norman, Oklahoma. And I was like, cool, I would like a job.
What everybody says
Indeed,
when they graduate. Yeah. All right, school's over, I need a job.
Great. But Weathernews is a Japanese company. So our headquarters is actually based in Japan. And we're a weather company. So we do a lot of work for a lot of markets, a lot of domestic markets in Japan, like road and rail and things like that. But our major global market is maritime. We also do aviation and some other global markets, but those are the main ones that we have work in. When I joined Weathernews, that's what we were doing here in the US. And so it kind of naturally got connected to that. But yeah, it's been 22 years. So something went right. Ostensibly, it was something going into a weather job, but kind of falling into a maritime job. And I think with a lot of people, a lot of the experiences that people have is kind of get a taste of it, and you understand kind of the scope and the importance and the feeler that it has on everything. And it really becomes a more interesting and kind of consistent challenge. And it's changed a lot, continues to change. And so that challenge, those challenges that we have, the problems that we're solving continue to evolve. So it's really fruitful in that respect.
One of the things, the challenges that we have in this industry is we are a hidden industry. Even within seafaring areas, I'm in the Northeast near New York, but you must have a little bit of a challenge in landlocked, non-maritime Norman, Oklahoma, to explain the importance of weather on ships. And everybody knows, and not to downplay it, the importance of weather in that part of the United States, like many other agricultural first areas. Weather plays a big part on the economy. And then on a more serious note, an even more serious note, a big part on day-to-day health in terms of worrying about things like this time of year, like tornadoes. Maritime may seem really abstract when you are sitting in a landlocked part of a country, in this case, the United States. I'd love to hear when you're out and about and maybe you're at a social event or non-work event. How does that go down to people who really focus on farming and what goes along with agriculture.
In a place like Oklahoma, weather is really like kind of on the forefront. People are pretty literate, I guess, in terms of kind of weather and its impacts. But yeah, we get that question all the time, like, what are you doing here? And the reason for that is we have a collaboration with the University of Oklahoma. So the founder of our company was good friends with one of the founders of the School of Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. So when they were looking to relocate from California, which is where we were originally located, we moved here to the campus, or we're actually on the campus of the University of Oklahoma. And we have this collaboration with the university, which has been really fruitful from a weather standpoint. So a lot of the technology that we've been building over time in terms of weather modeling, data simulation, instrumentation development. So we have like a low cost weather radar that we developed with the university here. So these are all things that we've been able to kind of accomplish with this like physical location of being co-located with the University of Oklahoma. But yeah, every time I'm somewhere where they're like, you're in Oklahoma, what are you doing there? And why? And, that's of course the reason why, but it definitely is a kind of point of curiosity. Now, the value of computers is that we have this ability to communicate from this location. But yeah, we do outreach to the university to talk to students in the School of Meteorology to say that this is actually a part of meteorology. Marine meteorology exists. And it's an really interesting, actually, part of the meteorology as a study as a whole. So yeah, it's even when talking with shipping people in those types of networking environments, we'll have situations where people are saying, oh, yeah, actually, you do need to do that, don't you? That weather is really important. And, you think about it, of course it is, but you just don't. It's just not in the forefront in the way some of the other parts of the maritime and shipping are.
I think that just you getting out there in a non-traditional shipping area, such as Oklahoma, is fascinating, because I think as the maritime industry expands, especially with technology, right? And I'd love to get into what you're doing on a day-to-day, but certainly your job lends very well to not having to sit in the port of Hamburg or the port of Houston or anywhere in the world, that you could do your job just as effectively sitting literally in the middle of the country, or any country. You could sit in the middle of a continent in Africa or South America and do your job because you are qualified to do that job. But I'd love to hear about what you do on the day-to-day and how you communicate with the industry. And maybe a little bit, you mentioned the change word, which I think digitalization in the maritime space is all about change management. And it could go back to date as far back as the implementation of ISO ISM, which I was a part of for Mobile Oil back in the mid-90s. And I remember everything, the consultants that would come in would talk about change management. So I'd love to hear your opinion about your role, how it's changed in the 20 plus years that you've been there, and how the mindset has changed from your clients and from the industry.
The type of support that we provide are kind of many and varied. We will do support with planning. So, you want to fix a voyage and, what the implications of that situation might be based on weather risks. We provide like route suggestions, optimization suggestions for underway voyages. We monitor the vessel while the vessel is underway. And then we also provide like performance analysis after the voyage arrives. So kind of all the kind of times during the voyage where weather risk has an implication on the situation. So that means communicating with both the master and the shoreside operator about, what those needs are, what they're trying to accomplish. Of course, safety is the number one priority. So that's what we're always focused on in terms of the vessel itself. But in terms of then the commercial side implications of, what are they trying to do? Are we trying to make a laycan? Are we keeping a schedule? Are we minimizing fuel consumption because we don't have a schedule? What are the actual particular situation that we're dealing with that then need support? And then when we're thinking about how to support the voyage optimization, we're looking not only at the weather conditions, but we're looking at the vessel itself. What kind of vessel is it? Is she loaded? What kind of cargo does she have? All of these things that, matter in terms of what kind of strategy to take, how you're going to manage the situation. And if something doesn't work out, what kind of contingencies can we put in place to help deal with that situation? So like, just as an example, like if we had, we're going to hurricane season in the Eastern Pacific now. So if we had a vessel sailing from, let's say, Tokyo to the Panama Canal, the weather right now across the North Pacific is pretty cooperative. compared to other times of year, there is a chance of tropical development starting right around this time of year. So that's what we're looking at. We're monitoring those types of situations. If there's a risk, we need to communicate both that to the master and to the operator to help them understand, what the challenge might be, if it might affect, perhaps the arrival time into the Panama Canal and what implication that might have. If the system then develops, helping the master avoid that system safely and hopefully minimizing the impact on the overall outcome of the voyage, communicating that to the operator then to understand, will that affect, the passage plan for the Panama Canal. So things like that are all kind of parts of the decision-making process of the voyage. That's what we're doing on a daily basis. And that's what we're trying to support our customers with. And that can be both on the kind of day-to-day scale and on the kind of longer-term scale. So, once you pass the Panama Canal, you have the continuing voyage. And what's the story on that? What's the planning we need to have for that? What's the target for that? And how can we support those things?
I think that's absolutely fascinating. And then let's mix into there the impacts of what people are calling a very strong El Nino effect this year, which I'm sure you've been talking about. But I was in a conference recently in Panama, and everybody's starting to think about El Nino because of what happened 2, 3, 4 years ago with the canal and the water levels there. And then all of a sudden, that may be more of the long-term thinking that you are, that, hey, we need to think about cargo sizes if there is, and there's no indication at this point that we're going down that road, but you have to start to think based on what we know on meteorology and weather that we could face this. So we have to start thinking about the cargo load, which gets me to my next question is how has that evolved? Because I started my time at sea, going from Texas to Florida. Yeah, the standard stuff, avoiding the hurricanes, things like that. But as we've seen, especially in the last few years, this real focus on emissions reduction, right? So it's used to be, could get me there the safest, obviously with safety, but now and sometimes it was get me there the fastest because the markets are rising and I want to catch a good market, or the opposite, right? Like if I get there slow and the ship sits for a while, demurrage will take effect, and demurrage is better than my earnings rate, right? I'm thinking from a very bulk side of the business, but I'd love to hear what you're hearing and what you've seen on that change of, we have to consider all that plus environment. And then let's throw in what's going on now where generally rates are pretty high. Is that still a consideration, or a lot of people saying, well, I don't care, I just want to earn money, I don't care what my emissions look like? What are you seeing right now, and how has that changed?
Yeah, for sure. So same, like when I first started, vessel sailed at 1 speed and it was full speed and that was it. And then the crash of 2008 happened, and we had more pressures on the market and the industry and the economy as a whole, and started seeing eco speed happening. But now it's a lot more sophisticated. People are really paying attention to vessel performance, and then that is being kind of folded into the optimization concept of, how can I minimize costs when you're talking about higher rates or higher fuel costs? Can I make the balance of those two? And, what's the perfect speed to sail or the perfect RPM to sail at to, make that, hit that kind of sweet spot to do that. So that is one part of the industry that has, for me, I've had to learn a lot more about vessel performance and voyage simulation based on vessel performance. If you want to get real technical about it, because that also, affects the optimization that you're putting together. So, of course, we need to understand what the issues are with respect to the weather and how the vessel is going to be affected by the weather, and then the risks associated with how the weather might change. But we also need to understand the performance of the vessel and how that is changing and how those two things work together. And so it's getting more sophisticated in terms of how people are thinking about these implications, because, those performance issues then tie directly into the emissions issues. And then, the downstream effects associated with that in terms of costs or,
ratings. I know a lot of people with the ratings are not too thrilled, but you still have charterers that look at ratings or look at emissions, especially when you get ships that claim to have good emissions in Europe, I'm thinking, because then the charters or those emission savings can then be used as credits.
Exactly.
So then it becomes into a whole, you're dealing with not only the cargo freight, but then this credit income or protected income, however you want to describe it, on the emissions or benefit thereof.
Yeah, exactly. And these are all parts of the story. So we do have situations where I can't sail at that speed because I need to keep the vessel at a B rating kind of thing. Like, okay, we have to change, how we analyze the situation and suggest how to maintain the targets based on that kind of implication. But then, what are the EUETS implications for this particular voyage? I want to know, calculate them for me. I want to know advanced. I know what they were. It is becoming part of the planning process. So all of these new regulations and new layers are adding into that decision-making process that the operators have to make those decisions. They have to figure out how to kind of prioritize each of those things. And then the challenge, of course, is having the master on the ship actually execute the voyage along those lines. So it's a couple of variables, but then also multiple parties being involved in the process.
Adding to the complexity, not only for the day-to-day operator sitting at his or her desk, but the captain, she or he kind of having to make the decisions to act on that. And question here, and this always gets into kind of the change management, resistance to change. You've identified a lot of cool pain points, but how do you balance this kind of very fast progression with technology? And we haven't even talked about AI yet. I'd love to pick your brain on that. But with, okay, I know what they're telling me to do. That doesn't smell right. Or an operator going, man, I don't know if we want to do that. And balancing judgment, boots on the ground with technology. How do you work in that type of environment as, let's say, you guys provide a service as a service provider and advisor? I mean, somebody with a master's degree in meteorology is not me telling you what to do, as much as I enjoyed taking the one class in meteorology at SUNY Maritime. So that's a different story.
The way I look at it is as decision support. So what are the options and what are the contingencies? We're a weather provider. So that's our core competency is the weather information. And a lot of people think about that as, just an issue that we have to deal with. So the weather forecast is the weather forecast and we just have to deal with that. Or the weather forecast will change and that's just life. We have to deal with the changing weather forecast. But we can quantify that. We can quantify that risk and in terms of probabilistic forecasting and some new technologies related to ensemble forecasting, we can build that into the decision support. And I think that that's one of the layers that we need to still tap into in terms of the communication aspect of what we're providing to our customers in terms of being able to understand, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. But if you do this other thing, this is what's going to happen. And then how can we help you decide the benefits and risks of each of those decisions and then help you then execute that voyage.
I think at the end of the day, and this has always been one of the struggles, especially adopting with new technologies, is this alignment, right? So a lot of times, I mean, and you could get into specifics about what you've seen with maybe some new technologies that you have, let's say, beyond just, okay, shut up and tell me which way to go, right? But now you're starting to quantify some of these scenarios and these other things. Where do you, it seems to be aligned, but still, do you still run into problems where people may not necessarily see this alignment? Because that's one of the recurring themes is people have a lot of great technology, whether it's AI based or blockchain based or whatever. And I don't think blockchain is going to be a discussion here, but I got all this cool technology. Let's whip it out. And it's like, well, this doesn't help that much, right? You have a new technology or have a new process. How do you try to align within the established workflows that you're working with the teams today?
It's a challenge of communication, right? One of the big challenges of weather generally, and this is a bit of a side note, but of weather generally, we have a lot of really interesting technology, but in terms of being able to help people understand what that means to them is really critical. And it's one of the biggest challenges that we have as weather professionals. And that same challenge actually conveys into maritime. What does this mean to me and what do I need to do about it? And it really is a challenge of communication. And so, but there's also kind of meeting people where they are. So one of the things that we did was convert our voyage plan output into something that was ECDIS compatible so that masters could just upload it onto their computers on board and be able to view it easily. The same information, but in a way that is just easier to get their hands on. And the same thing is true. We actually released a mobile app last year for facilitating communication. Hey, operator, we want to drift this vessel because there's a typhoon in the Western Pacific. It's going to have this implication. How does that sound to you? Are you okay? And that has facilitated that same communication that we might have undertaken under email previously. Now we can do through that app, which makes things a lot faster. But it's because we all have phones. It's really easy to see that.
You're all looking at it when you walk the dog.
They're not checking their email, but they are looking at their phone.
Yeah. it'll pop up on the phone. Yeah. And do you get into looking at kind of how the owner operator, if they have something like a Starlink or comparable, where that communication with the ship can be almost that type of real time, where you don't have to ping it and then it uploads and comes out, but literally with a Starlink type system, which we talk a lot about in the context of communication with the crew and mental health and things like that, which is really important. But then the rubber hits the road or the water hits the hull, you can actually impact the ship by being able to go on your phone and ping a message to, let's say, the operator and the master or the bridge, whoever would look at it. Is that something that you're doing and looking at? Because I think that would be like kind of the next evolution, if not done already.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the sort of classic thing that a weather provider has is an onboard system. And one of the things that technology improvement has allowed for is almost real-time connection. So that means that we can push weather data, we can push, the information, the risk information. The masters themselves, actually, we have some features that allow them to optimize based on the weather information themselves and see what the story is. So that type of technology has been really helpful for vessel safety on that side of things, where, masters do have access to more information real time or faster than before. They're not waiting for like a weather fax or something like that, or a PDF to come through an email. They're able to see it on board on their ship. So that's been something that we've really been able to take advantage of. And that's also kind of both directions, right? So we can communicate to the vessel, the operator can communicate to the vessel, but the vessel can communicate to us, and we can understand what's happening on board and then make changes and react to those more quickly.
That's what I was going to say. Is the other step beyond that is getting feedback coming back upstream, I guess you could call it, or back downstream, however you want to look at it, to you and or the operator to make, let's say, a more holistic opinion about, let's say, a direction or a speed or something. Not necessarily for, I guess you could do it for commercial purposes, but I'm thinking solely in lines of heavy weather, right? Let's get out of this heavy weather, or let's see what we can do. So I imagine that's also, that real time feedback is something that's valuable, not only from the in the moment, but then for product development. I used to be a product manager for 6+ years, right? That's like, oh wow, we're getting real time feedback on our product.
And that is part of the story. So it allows us to provide more information to the masters themselves. We have the ability to calculate things like vessel rolling and damage risk and shipping seas and things that have like safety implications to the vessel. We can share that information and they can share that information back to us. And so then we have a better sense of what's happening. And so it's actually, it's a pretty cool new way of using the technology for being able to talk to masters. So we have a phone, like we have a hotline masters can call us, and they do. It's actually pretty fun to talk to the shipmasters when they're happy with us. I guess having that level of communication that allows us to understand kind of what we're providing to them and whether or not it's actually helping them in a real-time way is pretty meaningful.
Yeah, you talk a little bit about like just the amount of information and the different types of information. I just think about things like this past winter here in the Northeast, where you had dueling models for a snowstorm, right? You had the American model, the model, maybe a third model. One was like, oh, you'll get like an inch, and the next you're going to get 2 feet of snow and you won't see your driveway until, April. My question is are ship owners especially and the crew, are they becoming more sophisticated to ask those questions? Have you seen this like sophistication level of being able to really probe and to have a better understanding of not necessarily the details of the modeling, but that there are multiple exists, that there are risks? Have you seen that evolution of like the change in sophistication of your user?
That's a really interesting question. It really depends on the user. I think that there are weather enthusiasts that are interested in that kind of thing and will dig into the background information more. But I think across the board, it really is kind of, they're looking at what we're feeding them. And so they're basically trusting what they're getting and looking at it for face value. And so that's why it's really important for us to be able to have this kind of level of communication, but also utilizing the technology, like I mentioned, the probabilistic forecasting. Those are ways for us to quantify the risks. What's the difference between the 1 inch and the 22 inches? Well, what do all the other models say? And there's actually like probably a consensus in there that you can actually go hit on. And that's why you need kind of the, why you maybe hire a weather professional to do that kind of thing for you. But in terms of understanding the implications of the weather, I think that ship masters and ship operators are aware of that. And I think especially one of the things that's been happening more and more, talking about the Panama Canal previously, is the idea of seasonal forecasting. So what's this upcoming winter going to look at like, and what do I need to prepare for? So I think that it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think that those folks that are aware of it and understand kind of what is out there and can be available for them when they use it, it can be pretty fruitful.
And of all of this, where do you think ship owners, and the industry as well, because you probably have other cargo owners that are looking to do that. And then the interesting thing that, you kind of have the overlap of people who are doing grain have to ship that. So they kind of probably want to know what Mississippi River levels are doing, which, kind of overlaps, especially here in the U.S. But then you see a lot of that in South America. I think it's the rivers in Brazil and Uruguay that people look at that Rhine River for barging traffic as well. What would you say is probably of all those things, the biggest pain point that you see right now in maritime when it comes to weather forecasting and routing and that sort of stuff?
The river forecasting is something that we have actually recently gotten into out of requests from some of our customers of some challenges that they've been having, St. Lawrence River and the Amazon and the River Plate and other areas where there might be challenges. So that's been something that we've been sort of working into the decision-making process. It's true that weather is becoming more violent. That's just a fact that we've observed over time. I think that side of things, the weather is heavier. So for example, this past winter in the Atlantic, it was the heaviest winter in the last 10 years. We had a lot of disruptions in terms of vessels sheltering in the English Channel for 5 days at a time to avoid some heavy conditions in that part of the world. And those types of things happen more frequently. We see more rapid intensification of tropical cyclones that are happening. So it's this kind of stuff that I think is the kind of risk and challenge, that it's new, it's different, it's not what you're used to, it's not what you learned when you started, and it's new for us too. And so being able to kind of cope with that and communicate the risks around those types of changes, I think is probably one of the bigger challenges in front of us right now.
That's interesting, because I think you're right. And anybody that kind of just even watches the weather here in the U.S., and I think it was last year, right? We had a couple of hurricanes that one day nobody's talking about, and next day it's the Today Show or the morning show, whatever you watch, is showing people boarding up their homes, right? Within 36 hours. It's not like, oh, we've been looking at this for 2 weeks and here it comes. And no, it was like 2 days ago, this was maybe a low pressure with some formation. And now, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, it's looked very different. One of the things I love to ask, and I think this question is so awesome for you because of where you are and and kind of how you got into maritime. And for those that listen, know that I got into maritime. For me, I don't have any family in it. I went to a college fair at my local high school. I saw SUNY Maritime. It was close to where my dad grew up. He thought it was like a Navy base. He had no idea what it was. He grew up 20 minutes away from there. I went. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I like. And talk about being a weather enthusiast. I took a weather class my sophomore year, my introduction to meteorology. I did really well. The only reason why I did really well, it wasn't because of the math. It's because I actually was able to forecast weather, because I spent the summer before on a ship, on a MSC ship, Military Seals Command ship, where they gave the cadets like, okay, you fill out the weather log. And I'd have to fill it out like every day. And I loved doing it. So when we got up on the roof and did it, I was able to do it really well. And the professor was like, why aren't you an M&O major? I'm like, no. So that was my claim to fame with being a meteorologist. But I love it. I love looking at the weather. I love watching it and observing it. Talking to other people who are not either have a maritime background, which is a large percentage, as you probably know, people who it's a family thing, or they live in a place like Hamburg where their whole city's built around the port. When you talk to students at the university or other people, what do you say to them to be like, yo, okay, I know maybe being a meteorologist at a farming company or other things is pretty cool, but man, this job is pretty awesome. I look forward to getting up every day and dealing with different ships and different people and different situations. Is that what you tell them, or what do you say to the folks?
One of the things I never expected when I was getting my master's degree in meteorology was having like a bird's eye view on the global economy. But I do, just because we can see all the ship movements and what's happening. And so in that respect, it's really interesting stuff. We have the folks that are really interested into tropical meteorology, and we say, yeah, well, this is a really important part of what we do. We see the forecasting issues domestically, when over the ocean, everything is a lot more intense. And so you're dealing with much bigger systems and much more critical situations in terms of human safety. There's that aspect of understanding that we really are helping people. We really are doing something that is meaningful for people out in the world. And then of course it's the kind of cool stuff associated with the weather and being able to be part of that forecasting process. So a lot of folks don't even know that this is something that they could do, that this is something that is even necessary, and have no idea what's happening out in the oceans. But it really is an important thing, and it's pretty fun to be able to tell everybody exactly what's at stake and why it's important.
I think you put it right. You get a bird's eye view of the economy, and certainly now people want to know what's going on. Now, it's for different reasons because of the Straits of Hormuz and what's going to impact, but certainly you doing this on a day-to-day level of looking at just generally routing and changes in routing, which I'm sure you've seen over time in the 20 years. That's what I always explain to people. I'm like, listen, yeah, I'm passionate about it. I like the industry, but very few industries, you're basically impacting global trade, which is $1 trillion business. And if you think about it, Amy, there's not that many people involved. I mean, if you think about the grand scheme of things, but 100,000, 200,000 people, but putting the sailors aside. How many people are really like controlling ships, buying ships, moving them around? You can have an impact as a meteorologist on hundreds of really tens of millions, if not more, of asset, both cargo and vessel. And again, not to say the 25 humans on board.
When we're looking at situations where a typhoon is crossing the Taiwan Strait and we have to stop all of that traffic going both directions, that's a big deal. That's a big decision and has a big impact downstream on those things. It's one of those things where you kind of put it in the back of your mind, what impact this might be having when you're taking a safety decision. Like, these things all matter. We hear from our customers regularly about, I don't know, do we have to do it for 5 days? Can we do it for 4? I step back and think about it. It's like, oh man. But when you're in it, you're looking at what the situation is, and you're making the decisions based on what you're
decision. In my case, as a broker facilitating it. So love this conversation. Thank you so much. I'd love to wrap up with, what are you reading these days? It doesn't have to be like something about business or meteorology. It could be, I read, everybody who listens to this, I love Star Wars. I'm reading a Star Wars book or sci-fi, or I'm reading Tolkien again. Who knows, right? But what are you reading?
So I'm a member of WISTA USA, and my chapter has a book club. So shout out to WISTA Great Lakes Midwest and the book club that we have. But we just finished up a novel called I Cheerfully Refuse, which was set on Lake Superior. And I'm now right in the middle of The Gales of November, which is the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. We had the CEO of Interlake, Mark Barker, who's actually, Mark's a classmate of mine. We did that on our on the occasion of our 30th anniversary from SUNY.
Right on.
So that's fantastic.
Actually, a couple of folks in the chapter are from Interlake. So
great company. Mark is a long time.
Seems like a really good company.
Yeah, and they've been around for a long time. And obviously, weather up there, people think, oh, the lakes. Yeah, well,
how bad could it be?
Yeah, how bad could it be? Good luck with that. Anyway, I'm not going to find out. So anyway, Amy, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for providing some insight in an area that impacts the maritime industry every single minute of every single day. And I really appreciate you telling us the story of how things have changed and how you're working with that. So I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's really been great to talk about the weather, and I'm happy to do it anytime.
Absolutely.